Good evening. My name is Miguel Angel Dominguez. I have the honor and privilege of practicing in the state of Georgia as an attorney. I'm a plaintiff's attorney at Morgan & Morgan Atlanta and a former prosecutor. And I've invited some of my friends and colleagues here this evening to discuss our journey as Latino attorneys in this state. And I guess I'll start with you, Judge, if you could introduce yourself, name and what you do.
Absolutely. My name is Dean Carlos Bucci. I am the Superior Court Judge in the Paulding Judicial Circuit. I've been doing that about 8 years, and before that I was in private practice, doing primarily civil work, a lot of domestic relations litigation, and I'm thrilled to be here.
Awesome. Judge?
Sure. Tony Del Campo. I am an attorney here in Atlanta. Practice with El Campo, Grayson, and Lopez with my good friend here. I was born in Peru, moved here when I was 10, and glad to be here.
Awesome. Thank you for being here. Judge?
My name is Ana Maria Martinez, and I am a DeKalb County State Court Judge. I am originally from Colombia, South America. Moved here when I was 12, and I love being an attorney in Georgia.
Awesome. Thank you for being here. Judge?
My name is Dax Lopez. I'm also originally from Puerto Rico, and I practice law with Tony at Del Campo, Grayson, and Lopez. I was also a state court judge for about 11 years in DeKalb County, so we have a large contingency from the DeKalb County State Court here on this panel.
Yes.
My name is Jason Estevez, and I am lucky to be on this panel with these distinguished lawyers and judges. I've been practicing for a little bit over a decade. I'm from Columbus, Georgia, but I was born in Puerto Rico. And I am also fortunate enough to serve the people of Northwest Atlanta in the state Senate.
Awesome. And I neglected to mention where I'm from. I'm also from Puerto Rico by way of New York. It wasn't on purpose that I got most of you all to be from Puerto Rico, but you just happen to be great folks. So thank you for being here. How many of us in this group are first generation U.S. citizens?
I neglected to say that my family is also from Puerto Rico. My mom was born and raised in Puerto Rico. I was raised here. But I'm glad you asked that. You say citizens, and some people don't know that Puerto Ricans are U.S. citizens.
Good point.
When I was a kid, I had a friend in the neighborhood, whose name I won't mention, and she said, "Why did they let you wetback Puerto Ricans into the country?" Mm-hmm. And I had to go home, can you believe that, to my mom and say, "What's a wetback?" Mm-hmm. And her response was perfect. She said, "She's so stupid she can't even get her racism right." So Puerto Ricans are citizens.
Right. Any first generation?
Yes, I was born, as I said before, I was born in Peru. I'm a citizen now, obviously, but I was born in Peru, lived there for 10 years, and didn't speak any English before I came here. And some would say I still don't, but
I have a very similar story. I was born in Colombia, and I moved here when I was 12.
Okay.
Still struggling with my accent,
Right.
but that's all right.
Right. Dax, you too, right? You were
Born in Puerto Rico, so U.S. citizen. Both my parents are Puerto Rican, but moved to Georgia when I was 6. And I'm sure, as all of us can attest, here we're all Mexican. There is no, what part of Mexico is Puerto Rico in? It's like, well, 2 different places. But yes, so my family is originally from Ponce, Puerto Rico. And I moved to Georgia when I was 6, but I've lived in 9 or 10 different states, primarily in the South, and just kept coming back to Georgia. And Georgia's sort of the place where I ended up after several moves, including after law school, moving back to Puerto Rico for 2 years to clerk for a federal judge down there. After my clerkship is when I finally came to Georgia and been here ever since.
My family's also from Ponce, Puerto Rico.
Ponce.
Lo demás es
parking.
Not Ponce.
Not Ponce.
Ponce.
That's right.
How about you, Jay?
Yeah, I was born in Santurce, but my family's from Catalina in Puerto Rico, and moved here when I was 2. Spanish was my first language. Learned English around 4 years old when I was exposed to pre-K down at Fort Benning, right outside of Columbus. But very similar experience where when I went to school, down in Columbus, people knew black, white, Mexican.
Yep.
The concept of there being diversity within the Latino community was something that was foreign. So they immediately associated being Puerto Rican with being Mexican, and didn't quite understand that Puerto Ricans existed and that they were citizens.
Well, I think that that's a really important thing to talk about, is how different the Latino community is. We all look different. You cannot walk into a room and assume who is Latino and who is not, because you have blonde, green-eyed Latinos, and you have, African,
That's a great point.
American Latinos, or Afro-Latinos. You have, redheads, and you have anything in between. And I think that's one of the biggest struggle, is how do we come together as a community when it's so hard? Because there's also the question of names, right? Not everybody has a Lopez or Martinez or something like that, You have a Bucci, and you have a Newman, and you have other last names that don't sound Latino. So how do we all come together, being so different and looking so different?
Yep.
Well, a couple things there. I mean, my family, particularly my mom is more of a white Puerto Rican, my dad black Puerto Rican. If you look at my dad's side of the family, you wouldn't be able to distinguish them between African Americans raised in South Carolina versus a Puerto Rican raised in Catalina. You would not, just looking at them, would not be able to tell.
And I'm sorry.
And- go
You say that. My mom's born and raised in Puerto Rico, and a lady one time said, I love your accent. Where are you from? And she said, I'm Puerto Rican. And she said, but you're white.
And that's important.
Excellent
And it's
example.
important for the viewers of this to understand. And we were talking about this just a little earlier. For some reason, folks in the U.S., I think that the issues, race issues, black and white, like it's a uniquely American thing. Black and white and race is a global structure, right? And so you're going to meet Puerto Ricans who identify and say 100%, I'm from Puerto Rico, I'm a proud Puerto Rican, but they may identify as white. You're going to meet Puerto Ricans that are going to identify as black, and both are true, right? And race is a structure that's just been created, right? And so I think people make certain assumptions, like, they may meet one Puerto Rican or one Colombian, and that person identifies either as black or white, and then the assumption the next time they meet someone from that country is, oh, all Colombians think they're white, or all Puerto Ricans think they're this or that. And you just really gotta start asking questions and get to know where people are from. How were they raised? Who are they? Right?
Well, we become the representative for that group.
Right, exactly.
So I went to high school here in Georgia, even though I moved around a lot. I went to high school in Powder Springs, Georgia, and in the late 80s, early 90s, and so not a lot of Latinos in that time frame. And so I remember my friends' families would say, well, you're not like other Puerto Ricans. And I was like, well, how many others do you know? And they're like, well,
Right.
none. And I'm like, well, then how can you even begin to gauge? And they had those perceptions from TV and movies, and that we all carried knives or stole, or. And I was like, what? I mean, my dad's an engineer, my mom's a teacher. Like, we don't all of a sudden become that representative, because now they know one Puerto Rican, and you now speak for the entire Puerto Rican community. And I'm sure it's the same for Peru and Colombia and folks, in this room.
Yep.
I think that's, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say that representation that gets put on you is even more highlighted when you have a position of leadership. I am the first Latina trial court judge in Georgia. And I have an amazing job, but it is so much responsibility every time I get on that bench, because not only do I have to do a good job as a judge, I feel like I have to go do a good job as a Latina, as a Colombian. That if I make a mistake, the rest of the world is going to say, see, that's what Colombians do, or that's what Latinas do. And so that added pressure is incredible. And I think that that's why it's so important that people understand that we may all identify as Latinos, and that brings us together, but at the same time, we're all individuals.
Yes.
Right, I mean, but to your point, I was the first Latino to be appointed to a trial court of record in the state of Georgia. Right, and I was very aware, like you, people are going to be looking at me, and I have to be better than everybody else, or at least I felt that way. Maybe I really didn't, but I felt that way. Sure. And I think sometimes we self-regulate and put pressures on ourselves that don't necessarily need to be there, but we do that because I know that there are going to be perceptions by people, rightly or wrongly, that are going to say, oh, he's like this, then we're not going to put any other Latinos in the midst. So it's very important for me to be excellent so that I could pave the way for a Dax,
Yes.
for Ana Marina, for a Dean, for everybody that came after us, because
Right.
that's important. And the point I was going to make before, people sometimes mistake race with ethnicity, right? Ethnicity is, the country you're from, the food that you like, the music that you listen to. Like, you can be Puerto Rican, you can be Puerto Rican, you can be Puerto Rican, you can like, arroz con gandules and then salsa,
I do.
but you guys all look very different,
Right.
right? From a race perspective, you may be different,
Right.
but from an ethnic perspective, you are the same, right? And so, in Peru, where I'm from, I'm considered white. I'm considered tall.
Right.
People laugh at me when I say that here. But in Peru, I am light-skinned and I am tall.
Right.
Because you have very indigenous populations that look very
Yes.
different, that are shorter, look different than you. And, there's, as you said before, there's a lot of what we would say here racism, but it's not really racism, it's sort of bigotry. You're treating a different class of people differently because of what they look, not necessarily because of their race.
And those are all great points. And I also think that, for folks that are interested in really getting to know new folks that they meet from different places and from different countries, it's important to just do a little, if you're not going to ask the questions and educate yourself with the person, or you feel embarrassed about maybe not knowing, just a little bit of research. I mean, the reality is that all of this is very complex. I'll just take my little island, for example, right? Puerto Ricans, there were original people, Taino Indians, that were there to begin with, right? And then the African slave trade was brought through those Caribbean islands, and there were, Spanish slaveholders, right, that were coming through there. And so those bloods mixed to get what we now know as a Puerto Rican, right? And that's not unique to Puerto Rico. There are tons of stories like that in different countries, whether it's Brazil and the Portuguese, or, wherever. And so it's important for folks, I think, to just open their mind up a little bit and get a little bit of education, and not be so closed off to what they think it might mean to be from a particular country.
And doesn't that illustrate the absurdity of racism? Because if you go back far enough, don't we all share common ancestors?
Right.
And so some of the most vicious racist people don't know that if you go back however many generations, there are Latinos in their family.
Right.
That kind of thing.
Right. And then she mentioned, your last name, Uchi. I mean, so like my family, we have some Parisis in my family, which goes back, in fact, where we're from. If you go to the old firehouse in Ponce, right, a lot of those pictures of firemen back in the day, they're Italian. They're Italian, right? And so that's because, folks are leaving their country of origin, and they come to an island, they fall in love. This is paradise. I want to raise my family. Now you have those bloodlines in your country as well. So it is very complicated.
On my grandmother's side, her grandfather was the first Italian family to move from Italy to Puerto Rico. And so our roots are Puerto Rican, but really Italian, Spanish, indigenous. So it's just a mixture of all cultures, but part of my family was Italian.
Very important to understand all that. And so for those of you here that actually grew up in Georgia, born and raised in the South, even for some time, even if you moved away at some point, what was that like? How did your with all that we just discussed as a Latino, being born and raised in the South, how did that shape you? I'll start with you, Jason.
Yeah, although I was not born in the South, I was certainly raised in the South, starting at an early age, and I think my journey was one of not necessarily feeling like I belonged to any one group, because not being able to have your own identity early on, people not knowing what a Puerto Rican was, especially like they do today, made it to where I didn't feel Puerto Rican, and then because of how I look, people would automatically associate you with being black, and then at home my parents would say, well, you're Hispanic, you're not black. That was confusing.
Then you're Estevez?
And then I'm an Estevez. And then to make matters worse, I was confused on whether I was black, Puerto Rican, Latino, Hispanic, what am I? And then I, for high school, moved to Orlando, where they have real Puerto Ricans down there. A lot of them. More Puerto Ricans in Orlando than in the island.
Right.
And when I moved there, when I was 16, I was looking around, and I'm like, I'm not like these folks. And which confused me even more, because I was like, I'm a Georgian.
Yeah.
Right.
And it wasn't really until college when I went to the University of Miami, and I saw and met Latinos, Jamaicans, Haitians, lots of folks from the Caribbean who had my experience, my story, where they were from, that I really started to kind of grow into myself. And today they have the term Afro-Latino, which they did not have 30 years ago.
Yeah, they didn't have that when I was coming up either.
But certainly growing up, it was one of not really fitting in.
Sure.
But what I've learned, and you see this here, is that I learned to really float between communities and really adapt in whatever community I was in. I was good with the grandmothers in Buckhead, with the grandmamas off of Cascade, or the abuelitas on Buford Highway. I mean, I'm fine wherever I'm at. Wherever I'm at, and I think that is because I was raised in the South as a Puerto Rican, as a Latino.
Did you, before we move on from you, I just want to ask you this. Growing up in the South, in all that you just described, was there also a sense that you weren't black enough?
Yes.
Okay.
Because
so you were getting
this is going.
I just want you to
much bigger conversation. This is going deep. No, it's actually pretty funny.
Keep it all the way real.
Yeah, no, it's pretty funny because I cannot identify as African American because I don't have that rich history that African Americans have in this country through slavery, starting with slavery in this country, in this particular country, and then the cultural, religious history that comes with that. But I certainly identify as black because I've had a lot of the experiences that African Americans, black people do, particularly growing up in the South. What was funny, and the reason I started laughing is, my wife makes fun of me, who is African American from Mississippi. She makes fun of me all the time. It'll be a old school R&B singer that she was raised in, and she'll be like, who's singing that? And I'll be like, Marvin Gaye, and she's like, no. I have no idea because I was not raised on Marvin Gaye. I was raised Salsa, Merengue, Tito Puente. And so it's funny because my upbringing is very much, in my household, was Puerto Rican upbringing.
Yes.
But my outside environment lends me towards the black community.
I everything Jason just said resonated with me because when I moved here, I was 6. We moved to Augusta, Georgia, and I went to Martinez Elementary, which I later was told I was mispronouncing. It's Martinez.
Martinez.
I didn't speak English, so I show up to school the first day of school, and I look at the school like Martinez Elementary. Great, someone here speaks my language. And I was like, no, they don't. And there were no English as second language programs back then. And to Jason's point, we didn't fit in, black or white. right? Neither group would speak to me. Like, I was a total outsider. There were no other Latinos. Georgia, I looked it up one time, had less than 1%. The population of Georgia was less than 1% Latino in 1980 when I moved here. So we don't have the population we have now. And so I come to to a new place, away from your family, away from everything you know, and no one at school would speak to me, and no one in our neighborhood would speak to us. We were total pariahs. But to Jason's point is that forces you to learn to adapt and to learn to talk to everybody. But I do remember I would ask my mom, "Hey mom, when's my hair going to turn blonde, and when are my eyes going to turn blue?" Because that's the only way I thought that I could potentially become part of my class.
And I wanted that wavy hair.
Yeah.
My hair just doesn't do.
Yeah, right. I want that good blonde hair. You know what I'm saying? Yes.
Just flow.
But early on, that was a really rough year. I will say that first year was really rough, and then we moved from there to Kansas. So talk about different.
Oh.
Moved to Kansas for a year, and my neighbor was the only other Puerto Rican kid in Topeka, Kansas at the time, and so he was my best buddy and loved him. But then we moved to Pennsylvania. I lived in Mahoopany, Pennsylvania, in Amish country. So completely different. And from Amish country, we moved to inner city Chicago. And from inner city Chicago back to Kentucky, and then Kentucky back to Georgia. And I was like, what you're forced to do is, first I'm moving every year, so I don't have time. You have to make friends quickly.
Right.
And you got to make friends with people who don't look like you, don't talk like you, don't have your shared experience. And then you're educating all these people, because no one knew what Puerto Rico was. Like, they're asking us what the conversion rate for money was. How do you send letters there? My favorite question, how did you get to the United States? And so I'll always say, well, on a plane. And then people would laugh, and they're like, no, really, how'd you get here? So I just created this elaborate story.
Oh my God.
On a raft, we hung on to my mom and dad on this raft. I had 10 brothers and sisters, and
terrible.
eight got eaten on the way here. And just me and my brother were the only two that survived.
Hilarious.
And people would believe it. They would believe it. So it sounds like we have planes, we have everything.
Dax, let me ask you this. So you're Jewish, correct?
I am. So be a Puerto Rican Jew in the South. Add that layer.
That's what. So I was going right there because, at least in the more typical sense, right? You've got a lot of Latinos that grow up Christian or in Catholicism,
Right.
and so you have a different perspective. How did your religious and those cultural beliefs factor into your experience in the South growing up?
Yeah, no, I mean, so my family converted to Judaism. My mom and dad were married Catholic, like many Puerto Ricans. We moved to the United States. We were Protestant for most of my childhood, but when I was around 12, we converted to Judaism. So I've identified as Jewish since I was 12. And then trying being a Puerto Rican Jew in the South. So I had people coming at me different ways. Like, some people didn't mind that I was Puerto Rican, but they cared that I was Jewish, right? And those same friends who were like, "You're not like other Puerto Ricans," they'd also say, "We're praying for you," and I'm like, "That's great." They're like, "That you don't burn in hell." And I'm like, "Wow!" I was like, "Man, this is crazy." But yeah, I mean, we've all experienced some level of discrimination or racism or bigotry. It just happens that when I was growing up, it happened to be on two fronts, right? And so I was a lot more calm. My brother was, I will fight everyone and anyone who calls us kike or spick or anything. I was like, as long as you're not throwing punches at me, I don't care what you call me. I'm good. Like, you have to learn to maneuver through the crazy. And one of my friends in high school, I'll tell you, was a Klan member. Like, his family was legit Klan.
Wow.
And at first he just told me how much he hated me. I was like, well, as long as you don't punch me or hit me, I can deal with your hatred from afar. Right. But then, like, we became buddies, and like he's like, we became friends, and I felt like that was always sort of my role. And I'm sure we've all played that role as it's our job to kind of cut through that stuff and I'm not going to fight you back. But I want to try to educate you. I want to try to show you that your preconceived notions of what you think I am and I represent are incorrect.
Yes. Dean, growing up in the South, how did it shape your...
My family moved to Georgia when I was 4, okay? So I'm a Georgia boy. And listening to y'all talk, I've had it so easy. I think people look at me, they don't see a Hispanic person. Unless you know my middle name, unless you grew up with me and knew my family. I mean, what I experienced was relatively easy. I mean, I'd get some kids in the neighborhood, why does your mom talk funny? I shared a story earlier, and just hear things like that. On the other hand, we were the freaking Puerto Ricans, okay? That's what we were on our block. But I spent a lot of time in Puerto Rico, and I went to school in Puerto Rico for a while as a kid. There, we were the gringos, so it's like I can't win.
Can't win.
Can't win.
Right. But my experiences were good, by and large. Surprised to hear you say, Dax, that you actually knew a Klan member, and it shows how much it's changed. I remember we lived in Cobb County, Marietta address. We're on Piedmont Road, in the car with my mom, and there's these guys in camo fatigues at the intersection handing out papers. This must have been 1980 in Cobb County. And they give us the paper, and the title is The Voice of the White Man. Mm-hmm. It wasn't that long ago. These were Klansmen that were comfortable enough to stand out in Cobb County, Georgia in 1980, early 80s, and hand out these papers. Wow. So there were instances like that you remember. But
if I can just share, so in 1990 in Powder Springs, I still remember when I was learning how to drive a car, I was with my great aunt who just passed away recently, but she was in her 60s then, and she had real bad cataracts, so she couldn't see all that well. And we're driving down Main Street, Powder Springs, and the Klan back then on Saturday mornings would stand out in full regalia, couldn't cover their faces, but they'd be in their hoods, with buckets collecting money on Saturday mornings.
And people are giving.
And so my aunt was like, pull over, I want to give that guy some money. And I was like, Titi, you know who that is? She's like, those are the Shriners.
No.
Not the wrong color hat.
Pointy hat versus flat hat.
But that was 1990.
That's shocking.
Wow.
Still in the early 90s, I mean, it didn't, their presence wasn't as big as before, but they were still around in certainly parts of the South.
So Tony, you and Anna, actually born and raised, arguably in a country that understood, right, that you're Peruvian and that you're Colombian. Having to go from that to coming over here and being in the South, how did that shape you? How'd you?
Right, so my experience, and probably Ana Maria's experience, is a little bit different than these guys because they all spoke English. Mm-hmm. I didn't speak a word of English, right? So coming here and having to learn the language and being made fun of because you didn't know what to say. I remember people used to tell me, okay, say this. I would say a curse word in class and I'd get in trouble, but I didn't know what I was saying.
Right.
And I remember the first year we were in DeKalb County, I went to Woodward Elementary, not Woodward Academy that you guys are thinking. It was the elementary school next to Cross Keys High School in Buford Highway, right? So that's where my first year. And then my mother wanted to move us to a nicer place, so we moved to Smyrna. And the mayor back then, Mr. Bacon, didn't like us very much, when I say us, Latinos, and they literally did not allow us to go to school there. So we had to move back to DeKalb County because I could not be registered in a school in Cobb County because of I was Latino, right? And we were undocumented for a period. I should say that was the main reason. But we could not go to school there. But in DeKalb County, we were allowed to go to school, so we came back to DeKalb County. I grew up with all the insults being called the Pepper Belly and all that stuff. We all, as kids, you just want to fit in. You want to be like the other. Now, I've always liked the food, the music, the dancing, and my mother and my family has always done a really good job in putting a premium on that. Value and honor who you are, right? Regardless of what's around you, remember who you are and don't lose that. To me, for example, that's been very important. Like both of my children, who are now adults, speak Spanish. We spoke Spanish to them at home, and that's important to us because I think it's important to maintain that cultural identity. That's a heritage for them. They were both born here, obviously, they're American, but it's important for me that they know that we're Latinos, and so they know about my mother's struggle. She speaks English, but very broken. And she had an MBA in Peru. We had a really big house. We had 2 live-in maids. But when we moved here, she started cleaning toilets at a Marriott. And she said, look, we're going to stay here for your future, for the land of opportunity that is this country. And so she worked 2 and 3 jobs. She didn't speak English, but just to get us through school. And we've all been very, very blessed and very fortunate and done very well. but you know, those struggles stick with you. You know, you remember those words that people say, you know, when you're younger. And like I was saying earlier, you know, I really wanted my hair to be, I wanted to get that feathered back look that was popular in the 70s and 80s. And my hair just wouldn't do that because my hair is very thick and it grows like this. You know, but it's, you know, but I also had it easy. My sisters, I think, struggled more because they're a little bit older. I think when you're younger, it's easier to assimilate because you have kids your age and you're playing, and yes, you get kids make fun of you and say things like that. But my sisters had a much more difficult time because they were 13. I mean, they're 14 and 15 at the time.
Yeah.
So they struggled a little more to fit in, and you know, culturally, I think they had it much more difficult than I did.
How about you, Anna? Coming from Colombia, which I know there's not maybe a prouder people except for Puerto Ricans. No, but I mean, it's an amazing country and beautiful people, and so you come up in that environment and then you're thrust into the South. So how did that shape you?
It was an interesting experience. First, as you said, in Colombia, I'm white, right? There's no question about that. Nobody would question that. And I came here, and it was very hard at first because people, even other Latinos, would question me when I said I was white. And that was a struggle because I felt very much unidentified. But I was very fortunate. I moved here when I was 12. I moved with my mom. My mom married an American. And I was fortunate in that even though it was just me and my mom, we had that support system. You know, my stepdad and my stepdad's family were there for us. At the same time, it was really challenging because they didn't understand what I was living through and what I was coming, you know, across. When I first came here, my maiden name is Flores. I was always Ana Maria Flores. And when I came here, they said, we're going to name you Anna Gray. My last name is Gray. So that people don't get confused at school. And I was Anna Gray for 3 weeks, and I had never any idea who they were talking to when they said Anna Gray. So I said, that's not going to work. And then I switched to Ana Maria Flores, and they couldn't handle the Maria, so I became Ana Flores. I still didn't know who that was. And it really wasn't until I was finished with college and I was getting ready to go to law school that I went back to being me, to being Ana Maria Flores. And I got back to that experience of telling people, this is my name, and you cannot shorten it because it's more convenient for you. But that's sort of the whole idea of my transition to the United States. It was trying to fit in as much as I could and then finding my way to being me and to being okay with being me. When I first moved here, I didn't speak English either. I went to a middle school in Gwinnett County that didn't really know how to deal with Latinos. They put us all in an ESL class where we all just spoke Spanish to each other and never learned anything. So about 3 weeks, a month into being in this ESL class, I told my mom I have to get out of this class because I am never going to learn English if I am in this class. So I remember going to they took me out, they asked me a million times if I was sure that that's what I wanted to do. And I got out of that class and I had no idea what was going on in the world. They asked another girl, a girl from Ecuador, to please be with me and direct me for the first few days. And the moment the bell rang, she was gone. And I think, I don't blame her. She was 11 years old. I mean, what is she to do? But I felt very, very alone.
Wow.
And it was a tough transition because I felt that if I didn't succeed, my mom's sacrifices would not be worth it. And so it was very important to me to get ahead, to do the best I could. The first few years were rough, but then after that, I'm very fortunate. My mom really instilled in me a very rosy attitude. So I've never really can tell you that I've encountered discrimination or things like that in the way other people have, not because I haven't encountered them, but because I choose not to look at it that way. It's, you know, I always feel like a lot of it is in my hands of how I react to situations, and that's what I've chosen to do.
It's funny you say, when you talk about your name, in Peru, everybody knew me as Pepe, because I'm Jose Antonio del Campo, and Jose's are oftentimes called Pepe, and so everybody knew me as Pepe in Peru. Everybody called me, when I go to Peru, my aunts still call me Pepe, right? And so the first day of school, we go to the principal's office. You know, I was getting registered, and so the principal asked me to write my name, so I wrote Pepe del Campo.
P.E.
And so he said, Pepe?
That's right.
And I was with my aunt who lived here. She spoke English. I said, no, not Pepe. She said, let's try something else. She said, how about Tony? And you know, I was 10 years old. I was like, sure. And so that's why I'm now Tony Del Campo. I didn't choose to be Tony Del Campo. I would have been happy with Jose or Pepe or whatever, but there was no such thing as Pepe back then, right? So I became Tony, and it stuck, and now everybody knows me as Tony.
Wow.
And then when I would get to class, every year after that, I would have to hurry to the teacher before that first day of school when they call the roll. It's like, I go by Tony.
Right.
Because I got sick of calling Josie, Jose. I mean, I got called everything. I was like, no, I'm Tony. You know?
Wow. So even needing to modify your name. You know, this is all fascinating for me. I was not raised in the South. I grew up in the South Bronx in New York, which is the melting pot. And, you know, it's been some culture shock, because growing up in the South Bronx, the neighborhood is primarily black and Puerto Rican. All the businesses are owned by either blacks or Puerto Ricans, so we're eating each other's foods, we're dating each other's children, you know, having families together. And so the cultures, the races, the foods, the traditions, they're all being literally, you know, blended. And you're going to school with folks that see that common ground, you know, and if they're black, they enjoy Puerto Rican food in the Bronx, and if you're Puerto Rican, you know all about soul food, right, or Jamaican food or whatever is there. And so it's a different experience. Now, we experienced racism. I experienced racism, but it was more so from my white educators that were coming in from upstate or wherever, Manhattan, that were coming into our schools, or the police. But it you know, if there were any, you know, white kids from a white family in our neighborhood, they weren't being racist towards us. They were more so assimilating to the Puerto Rican and black culture. So it was a different vibe. So I'll start with you, Dean. Tell me a little bit about what it has been like to be a Latino practicing attorney in Georgia.
For me, it's been more advantageous than anything. Ana Maria, I don't know if you've experienced this. I'm sure you have in DeKalb County, but someone comes into court and they're having a little trouble with English, and you answer them in Spanish, and they light up. They're like, thank God, okay? So whether it was in private practice or on the bench, it's been a positive, because I can connect with people, and I can, you know, somebody comes into court, they're uncomfortable, particularly if somebody, they may be undocumented, don't speak the language well, very uncomfortable, and so that's kind of a frightening environment for them. But when I answer them in Spanish and we start speaking, everything goes great. And it just, you could just see the weight come off their shoulders. So for me, you know, I'm pretty sure I got one of my first jobs because I could speak Spanish. It's been a benefit for me.
Sure. Sorry?
You know, it's funny you asked that. I started my career in South Carolina, my legal career in South Carolina. And I remember my first court hearing was for Judge McGowan. And he was like this prototypical heavyset, white, Southern judge. I mean, he had a spit bucket and his dog on the bench. I mean, that kind of comical caricaturist, that's who he was. So I did represented companies in the products liability lawsuits, defending them. And I remember my first day in court, said, Judge Tony Del Campo here on behalf of ABC Corp. And he literally went down and took his glasses down and says, Del Campo, you're not from around here, boy, are you? Boy and everything, right? So I could have taken offense and been, how dare you kind of thing. But I was like, no, sir, I'm coming from down south. I went to law school in Georgia and lived in Georgia, but I'm so happy to be here. My wife's a professor at Furman, glad to be here. Well, good to have you, son. I don't think he meant it like it came out and like I could have taken it. But that was like, wow. I mean, that was different. I did not expect that. But South Carolina was very much a good old boy system, back then in the early 90s. But then when I moved here in 1998, the Georgia Hispanic Bar Association had just started, and there were like 10 Latino lawyers in the entire state, right? So you could become president in like 3 years. There was there weren't many of us, and we would have, and so talking about the positive thing, we would have receptions for like the Supreme Court and judges, and because judges are elected, they go to all those things, right? So there would be like 10 members, and we would have like 15 judges. And that was the greatest thing because you got to know all the judges, right? And I remember Justice Carley went to one of the things and he asked me to be on his committee, and I was like a fourth year associate. I mean, I didn't know anything. I was like, yes, sir, I'll serve on your committee because I was, in the leadership of the Georgia Hispanic Bar, and they want, those folks to be on their committee, for re-election. So that was very much a positive, and obviously I think that ultimately helped me get my judgeship because there hadn't been, regretfully, any Latino judges, and I was appointed in 2002. I mean, that's been 21 years ago. That's not that long ago, and I was the first. We still don't have any appellate judges, and it took till 2022 to get the first Latina judge, right? So, it was it's been a long time coming, and we need more diversity on the bench, and I think that's necessary.
And to that point, we have all the first Latino judges in the state of Georgia sitting on this very panel.
First Superior Court judge.
Everybody.
Well, the only four.
The only four. That's it. The first and only, right? Now let me ask you this before.
If I could just really quickly.
Go ahead.
Because, not to brag, but I'm also the first Latino school board member in the state. And when you think about that, you have a lot of firsts in this room.
100%.
And our community, it just shows how new our community as a whole is to this state. Right? You heard a couple of us say that 30 years ago, there were just a few Latinos in Georgia. There weren't that many. And through the 90s, it really started to increase, particularly around the Olympics. And then in the 2000s, it just blew up. And today we're 10% of the state,
And
of the population.
And you should brag because I think that position, being on the school board, is unbelievably important because of what you're saying, because our populations are growing, because the number of Latino children that are going through our systems, they need to have that representation.
Absolutely.
And that's where struggle, if you want to define it as that, being sort of this part of this first wave of Latino leader attorneys in the South, meets opportunity, right? Because I was also the first Latino prosecutor in every jurisdiction I went to, Rockdale, DeKalb, and Clayton County. And that just wasn't available for me in New York, for example. Had I practiced, those titles, that was the 1 million. I just want to go back to something you said. So you were talking about how you handled that one interaction with that judge, right? And you chose to meet him where he was, right? And give him something about yourself that he could connect with, right? And so for any younger Latinos that may go on to watch this, I think that the question that they are often faced with is, where is the line? How do you make the decision, right, to not be offended, right, and go with the flow and do more of what you did, be diplomatic about it, or potentially use the moment to take a little bit of a stronger stance and say, no, I'm going to educate this guy right here and now. I'm from Peru, blah, 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 blah. How do you, what advice would you give? You know, you handled it as a young lawyer in that moment. I'm not all the way certain, though, that if that happened to you today, the conversation would stop there, right? There might be an opportunity for you to introduce your whole race, your whole country, right?
I start from the proposition that all racism is ignorance, right? And maybe they are racist because they are racist. Maybe they just don't know any better. That's one. Two, you're right, I was a young lawyer and talking to a judge who's a position of authority. I did not want to, bow up like I was feeling inside.
Sure.
Because I knew that was not going to do me or my clients any service. Because he was very nice to me after that. That judge was great for me, right? Every hearing and all that, he was good. But it was because I didn't. So I think from a strategic, you have to know your audience, know who you're talking to, and I think sometimes you get more with sugar than you get with vinegar. The second thing I will say, is people talk about discrimination, and I did Leadership DeKalb and Leadership Georgia, and one of those ethnicity or diversity training sessions, one person said, it's always stuck with me, is like, silence is the glue that holds discrimination together. Because people don't want to talk. There are a lot of people who may look at me and assume certain things, but they're not going to say anything because they don't want to be perceived to be racist, right? But I want you to talk to me. I want you to ask me so I can educate you. So I don't have any problem asking my African American friends, why is that girl that works at McDonald's so damn rude to me when I order my Big Mac? It's not because I might look white and she's black. It may just be because she's frustrated that she's having to work there, and this has nothing to do with that. But if I don't ask the question, I'm going to assume that maybe all black people are, this way or that way. So I think we need to be willing to have those courageous discussions as we're having here today, so that we can educate each other about who we are, what we are, right? And I think that's critically important.
But do you find yourself taking those opportunities, I guess is my question, right? So let's take the folks that we come to understand are not being purposely rude or racist. Let's take those folks off the table.
Sure.
When we get an inkling that we are facing racism in the South, do we take the opportunity to try to educate? I mean, what?
I think absolutely.
Okay.
Right? But that takes many forms. It doesn't have to be an aggressive, you don't know anything, because then you're shutting all conversation, right? It needs to be in a productive way.
Sure.
But I think you absolutely take the opportunity to do that.
Max, what's been your journey as a lawyer, in the South as a Latino? How's that been?
Yeah, I moved to Atlanta and worked at a big firm that did not have a lot of diversity, and the diversity was black and white, right? So I remember early on, as a young associate, they were like, we're going to pair you up with a partner mentor. That was a big deal at the firm I was at. I was like, that's great. I was in litigation and I'm waiting for my partner mentor, and finally one day they come and get me, like, all right, come with us, we're going to go talk to your partner mentor. We go and get on the elevator, we start going down. I'm like, wait, I'm a litigator, all the litigators are on the same floor, so where are we going? So we went 3 floors down to the corporate department, and they walked me into a partner's office, and he's an African American partner, and they're like, he's your partner mentor, he's the head of corporate. I was like, okay. Their view is like, well, he's not going to feel comfortable, and we have no Latino partners, so the next best thing is an African American partner. And so I was like, no offense to this great lawyer here, are there no old white guys that are willing to mentor me? Because I want to learn how to be a litigator the right way, and I feel like they know what they're doing upstairs. Can one of those guys take me under their wing?
You were looking for experience.
I was looking for, like I don't need, I mean, I get it. It's important. Yeah, Tony is my mentor for 20 years, so it is important to have people of similar backgrounds and similar experiences. But at the same time, I was looking to learn my job and learn how to do it well. And the people who made decisions about my compensation were all upstairs. They weren't on the 18th floor. And so I said, thank you, no thank you. Can we find someone upstairs that can help me? And it was not an easy fit because I didn't grow up playing golf. I didn't grow up talking about SEC football. These are things you learn to do to survive the corporate workplace. Because I watch soccer, which is football.
Right.
I like
real football.
The real football. No, it's big now. It wasn't then.
Right.
And the white associates got taken on golf outings with clients. I did not get invited on those. And it's who you know, how connections with clients. When the clients love you, that's currency in a law firm, especially the big firms.
Yeah.
So I would say it was not an easy time being the only one at the firm I was at. I did have some great mentors there. Still to this day, Sarah Doyle, Judge Doyle in the Court of Appeals was there. Judge Susan Edline was at the same firm I was at. So I had some good folks who did take me under their wing and did help me, even though they were not my official mentors. There were folks who at least tried to help me maneuver the big firm, but it was not an easy fit. Yeah. And that was the case with each of the firms I worked at. And then I think something we haven't talked about, there's also this sense of tokenism. Like, there's this view of, you went to Vanderbilt because of affirmative action. You got into Vanderbilt Law School because of affirmative action. Lucky you that you're Latino.
Right.
Otherwise, there's no shot in hell you would have gotten into that great school and that great law school. And good thing that our diversity initiative, we're looking for some diverse folks from those schools, so we hired you. There was always that tinge of, if it wasn't for your ethnicity, you might not be here.
That almost never stops.
And I was about to say, I was on the bench. And I remember, hold up, it's one thing for people outside of your chambers to say it. I had a 73-year-old woman who I inherited from my predecessor who had been at that courthouse for 20 plus years, had worked with me for 5 years. We had worked together 5 years. One day she walked in my chambers and she's like, I didn't realize you went to Vanderbilt. Oh, it must be nice to be Latino. You go to school like that. Wow. And then I was like, damn, woman. Like, right. You've seen what I can do in a courtroom.
Right.
You've seen how hard I work and what I do. But, man, had I not been Latino, I would never made it. So, but, you can't, like Tony says, you can't get mad. I mean, not get mad or offended, but there's always that, question. To Ana Maria's point, you are representing all Latinos in that position. You can't make a mistake. And there's always that question as to how do people perceive you. And I remember having a discussion with, we got into kind of a heated discussion with a fellow judge from another county at a judges conference. And we were having discussions about race and equity. And his view is basically like racism is over. It's a pure meritocracy. God bless America. And I was like, look around this room. There are more of you than there are of me. I'm the only one. Do you think that's because Latinos aren't good enough to be in this room, or do you think that's partly by design? And he had to think about it for a second. It's like, you had a 400-year head start.
Right.
Like, great, awesome. But let's recognize that I had to go to top 20 law school and a top 20 university just to have the same job you do, and you did not do that.
Sure.
So, I mean, I don't mean to be combative about it, but I feel like after 23 years, I can now say what I want.
Exactly.
Couldn't say this as a young associate.
Exactly.
You can't fire me now. That's right. You gotta bite your tongue when you're working your way up the ladder, right? All of us did at some point. We have to take things that sometimes we get worse assignments and terrible leadership or mentors or whatever. You have to bite your tongue, but there comes a point where now I don't have to bite my tongue anymore, and I'll tell you how it is. But I'm sure we've all felt it at some point where you have to make it to these positions. First state bar president, first judge, right? You have to get to these positions before you can finally start really speaking honestly. You don't get to those positions if you don't bite your tongue some of the time.
And we're going to have a band that plays salsa at the annual meeting. Just saying.
Right.
Love it.
First time in history.
Jason, tell us a little bit about your journey as an attorney, a Latino attorney here in the South.
Yeah, so for me it was somewhat different in that I was finally living my truth, very involved in Latino organizations, but also very involved in Black organizations. So starting at Emory, I was a member of the Latin American Law Student Association, president ultimately of Latin Law Student Association, and then I was a member of BALSA, the Black Law Student Association, and on the executive board of BALSA. And ultimately that culminated with me being Student Bar Association president. So I was one of those nerds in law school.
Me too.
Really? Overachievers.
Yes.
Overachievers. So my experience was that I felt very lucky to be where I was. And I still feel that today. I'm serious that I feel blessed to be in this room with all of you. Because my parents certainly didn't have these opportunities. And I see the statistics every day and know that many people who look like me, who came from where I came from, don't necessarily do what I'm able to do on a daily basis. So I had that chip on my shoulder as soon as I set foot at Emory, because I felt like I was the affirmative action kid. My LSAT wasn't as high. I'm the first lawyer in my family. I didn't know what the LSAT was until I decided to be a lawyer and go to law school 6 months before I started to apply. So I had no idea. I didn't grow up thinking I want to be a lawyer. So my LSAT was relatively low. My GPA was kind of mediocre. I went to University of Miami and had a little bit too much fun for undergrad. So I felt blessed to get into Emory and had a chip on my shoulder. So I felt like I had something to improve and worked really hard to ensure that anyone who questioned why I was there knew that I was there because I was there on a mission. So I was fortunate to work hard and show my worth, and I continued that even after I graduated, working at a law firm, working in house, running for office. I've done all this with that what do they call it, the outsider syndrome, where I felt like I didn't belong and wasn't supposed to be there. So that made me work even harder and motivated me to be even better.
Yes, sir. So, Anna, you have both the Latino badge that you're carrying with you, but also just a woman. Right? So that's a whole nother.
That's a whole nother
bag.
bag.
You know. So tell us a little bit about your experience as a Latina woman in the South.
Well, it was challenging because as a woman, I was not really quite taken as seriously as I wish I had. I remember when I went to take my first deposition, the other attorney asked me if I was a court reporter. Even the receptionist asked me if I was a court reporter. Right. And from that moment, I realized, again, you have to be excellent because you have to prove yourself every time, all the time. I worked as a litigator for a few years, and I was very lucky because I was in a safe space. I was in a great space where the attorneys at that firm really took care of me and really took the opportunity to train me the best they could. But more than that, I went to work for a Latino judge here in Georgia.
There aren't many, so let's see. Let's guess.
Somebody in this room.
Yeah.
Somebody in this room. No, I worked with Dax for almost 9 years. And I could not have been more blessed or luckier. I got to work with someone who was intelligent and capable and knew what he was doing, and I got to see that modeled every day. and I got to see that model from a Latino, and that was awesome. But on top of that, I worked in a space in which Dax understood my passion of helping Latino law students, and he not only understood it, but he nurtured it, and he gave me the space and the time to do those things. And while I was, I'd been practicing for 5 years. I started the Georgia Latino Law Foundation because I remember what my experience had been of not knowing where to turn, who to go to, what to do next. And the Latino Law Foundation has grown exponentially since we started in 2015. We have helped over 200, 300 Latino lawyers make a community, build a community, get connected. And to me, that has been worth every minute and every drop of sweat and blood and everything. But that would not have been possible had I not been where I was. So I was a very, very fortunate young lawyer. And on top of that, I got to learn about my current job. So I ended up in the perfect place for me.
So I got two, we're running out of time, and I've got two little questions. One that not everybody has to answer, but if you have a good story, I'd like to give you the opportunity to really connect with hopefully some of the younger folks that end up watching this. Do any of you have a particular story that you have as a Latino, just 30 seconds real quick, of something that happened to you that you know happened as a Latino lawyer that was an obstacle, like, something where you felt either excluded or, that you can think of off the top of your head? If you could take 30 seconds and tell us about it.
I was nominated for a federal judgeship. A couple of us had possibility to be federal judges, and our Latino-ness may have
forgotten about that.
Yeah, may have had something to do with it.
That little blip.
So in 2015, President Obama nominated me to be on the federal bench. So I was actually nominated and did not get through the confirmation process because of my involvement with one particular Latino organization that a U.S. senator from Georgia found objectionable.
Which was?
Galeo.
Right.
The Georgia Association of Latino Elected Officials.
Right. Which the purpose of that organization is to
basically empower the community to be politically active and to register folks to vote. So nothing nefarious, things that other NAACP does and MALDEF and other civil rights organizations do, but it was very much targeted at this one Latino organization because you don't mess with NAACP. Mm-hmm. You don't mess with, because those organizations are long established. Right. But the Latino community still had, we could still push them around. So that was a process where literally my Latino-ness was the reason I didn't get to be confirmed to a federal judgeship. Would have been the first Latino federal judge in the history of Georgia. Tony was a shortlister before me, so I took one step further than him, and his undocumented status for that small period of time when he was young prevented him from ascending the bench. And then my nomination, it's one step. So Anna's gonna make it. It's really the progression that we're seeing here. As you might see, the first Latina federal judge sitting on this panel. But sure, it happens, and at the time, obviously very angry about it. But now it may be a blessing in disguise.
Sure.
Long term.
Anybody
It's
else?
funny. Well, sort of piggybacking on that, I was told that I would be the next federal judge. The Senators Committee had met. The president was ready to nominate me. They had met, but then when they got to the senators, one of them, the one that also supported Dax, was willing to support me. The other one got some word that I was a chair of Galeo at the time, and they would not return what's called the blue slip, right? They would not give me a nomination. So I was stopped before I even got nominated. So I never even got nominated. Fast forward to Dax, they really messed him because they were told that they would return the slip on him. Mm-hmm. They promised, that was the deal.
That was the deal. Mm-hmm.
Right? And then at the last minute, they wouldn't even talk to him, and so he didn't get a hearing either. So, I was angry because, you spend the time and you talk to all the senators, congressmen, everybody supported me and all this stuff. But you know what? At the end of the day, I am so glad to be sitting with my partner, and I'm glad that we're not federal judges, because we're doing just fine. Now I hope Anna Maria makes it one day on the Court of Appeals, and Dean, hopefully they'll move up and we'll get more judges, because that's why we're here, to push it forward. Because when I was so sure I was going to get that federal judgeship that I told Dax, hey Dax, it looks like I'm going to get this. We need more Latino judges, and I'm the only one. So I want you to put in for my spot when I get bumped up.
That's the reason I put in for a state court spot. Is because he called me and told me that. And actually, the call was, hey, I'm going to get this. We need another Latino in my spot because I'm the only Latino state court judge. I was like, great. Who do you want me to call? I'll call whoever you want. And he's like, well, I think maybe you. And I was like, dude, I'm 32 years old. I'm not a judge. He's like, well, I was 32 when I became a judge. I was like, oh, well, okay. All of a sudden it became possible. Until he planted that seed, I'd clerked for a federal judge. I had worked with two folks who went and ascended the bench. And I had never considered myself as judicial material, nor was I planning on putting in until he said that. And then he doesn't get it. And then I was like, damn, I want to be a judge now. But luckily a spot came open and I was able to get the next one. So we actually overlapped for about 6 months before he bait and switched me and left me to go make some money. But no, it's crazy how everything sort of works out. And then I vacate my seat.
But and to Dax's point, it's about vision. It's about creating a vision for younger people. And that's one of the reasons that we all have done what we've done. Yes. Because I never in my life would have imagined myself as a judge had it not been for Dax tapping me on the shoulder one day and saying, I'm going to leave and you are next.
Yes.
And I remember looking at him and going, you are insane. I am perfectly happy being a staff attorney. But he said to me, you have been working with law students, telling them that they can ascend to these positions. It's time to put your money where your mouth is. And
well said.
And that's why we need Latinos in positions of leadership. And that's why we need Latinos to dream big. Because unless we get one person somewhere, it's going to be that much harder to open up roads and paths for everybody else.
But then when we get there, it's so important to have folks with the conscientiousness and the vision to say, it's not just what I accomplished. Who did I bring up with me?
Absolutely.
Right?
Reach back, pull forward.
100%. So as we wrap this conversation up, it's been beautiful. Thank you all for being here. I was wondering if we could leave the audience with one little piece of advice, right? And in my mind, that could be both a word of advice or encouragement to the Latinos coming behind us, but also could be a word of advice or encouragement to folks that haven't been blessed enough to have a Dax Lopez in their life when they were young and don't really understand the differences, right? If any of you feel comfortable speaking to that, jump in there.
Well, I'll start. It's not outsider syndrome, it's imposter syndrome.
Right. I knew what you meant.
Yeah,
so
thank you.
I just gave you the single part.
I wanted the folks watching at home to know that I knew that it was imposter syndrome. But for anyone suffering from imposter syndrome, and it doesn't matter whether you're a Latino or whether you're black, whether you're white, there's all kinds of reasons people experience that. Sure. My message is to flip that and to use that as your motivation and to help you ascend even higher, right? Don't let it hold you back, but use that negative energy and turn it into some positive energy, because you can certainly use it to fuel a very successful career.
Different way to say that is prove them wrong, right? Work hard and prove them wrong. I always tell folks, be so good you can't be ignored. They can hate you, they can say they don't like you, but if you're just so good, they can't ignore you. You are part of the conversation. And to Miguel's point, if you don't have someone like Tony or Dean or Anna in your life, you can call me. Del Campo, Grayson Lopez, I love meeting with students, law students, college students, young lawyers. I did it as a judge. I always told folks, if you're willing to come to Decatur, I will have lunch with anybody. And people would call my office, and my assistant hated it because she never knew why they were calling. They're just like, well, he said I could have lunch with him. And she's like, all right. And she'd put it on the calendar. And sometimes I'm showing up to restaurants not knowing who I'm meeting. But I met so many wonderful young lawyers that way. And if you're willing to come to Dunwoody, I will have lunch with you. We can talk about your future and what we could do, what Tony and I could do to help. My law partner, who's about to be the first Latino State Bar president, we can certainly help in your trajectory as a lawyer. Is something that we certainly have power to help you with.
And I'll open it up to piggyback on what you're saying to the older lawyers too here in Georgia, because I'll tell you, I've had a handful of conversations with attorneys that were much older than me and who were white that didn't share my experience. And as we got closer and as they realized who I was as a person, who I was as an attorney, and they began to trust and respect me, we've had some of the most beautiful, open conversations that I've had in my life. And they felt comfortable asking me things and getting my perspective, particularly during the time that we're in right now, right? I think a lot of our colleagues have certain questions about how we feel about certain things, whether it was DACA a couple of years ago, or whether it's, George Floyd, or whatever it is. Some folks may feel a little bit shy about initiating those conversations, but I really think it's important, because then you're just shooting from the hip, and you have resources around you to have conversations with people that I'm sure care about you and would be happy to share their perspectives. Anybody else have any parting words?
I tell law students, I work with law students on a daily basis as part of the Latino Law Foundation. That has become a passion of mine. And I tell them every day, be intentional. Think about what you want to accomplish. Think about the gifts that you bring. Don't let things to chance. You have to think. You can be flexible and you can change your mind, but if you don't have something in mind that you want to accomplish, it's going to be that much harder. And the other thing is, be a champion. Be a champion for somebody else. We have all been blessed with amazing opportunities, and it is really hard sometimes for us to talk about our own accomplishments. It is so much easier when we have a dear friend that can do it for us. Don't be afraid to sing other people's praises, because really that's how we all rise above.
The one thing I would say, I agree with everything that's been said so far, but I'm a firm believer of having a positive attitude. Right? Have I been discriminated because I'm Latino? Have I not been given a job because I'm Latino? I don't know. Maybe. Probably. But my attitude has always been, you know what? That's their loss. If they fail to see in me what I can do, that's their loss. I'm going to do my thing. I'm going to be the best lawyer that I can be, the best judge that I can be, the best state bar president that I can be. And whether somebody else fails to see that, that's their problem.
Right.
That's their failing, not mine. And by doing well and doing good and putting other people forward and bringing them up, I think you create this wake of positivity that I think makes us move forward.
Heard so many good comments here. I'll close by saying I'm honored to be sitting with all of you here. And my best advice for folks, and it's not just limited to the Latino community, but get involved. There's so many boards you can serve on. If you want to aspire and make yourself stand out and be a good candidate when it comes time for the governor to make an appointment, have a resume to show that you've served on this board that, works with battered women or feeds the hungry. That's easy to do. Dr. King said anyone can be great because anyone can serve, right? Get involved, and that will take you places in your career and will make you a prime candidate when it comes to being ascended to or nominated for a position.
And my word of advice is very similar to what Dak said. I mean, I've literally have let what you said just now guide my entire career, rather than fighting some of the bigotry and the racism and some of the discrimination that has come my way with words. I have worked harder, and just let my work product speak for itself.
Scoreboard, baby.
And
Scoreboard.
and now the reality, and you told me this a couple of years ago, you know, all of a sudden I'm the funniest man in the room, right? And we were just talking about everything that was going on with your career. And the same has been for me. There are individuals that I remember from earlier on that really weren't being all that nice. But, you know, a couple of verdicts and front page of the Fulton County Daily Report, all of a sudden you're the funniest guy in the room and everyone wants to have lunch. And so keep striving and practice with excellence and with heart, that you know you're representing people and that you actually have a actual license to do justice in this country. And keep that in mind and do everything with excellence, and things are going to work out. Just want to thank all of you for being here. I mean, it really took a lot of scheduling when you have I mean, you just came from DUI court and you know, GTLA conventions and being on the bench and everything that we do. Really, really appreciate being able to make this happen.
Thank you for putting it together.
Thank you for having us.
All right. Thank you, folks.